Hello and welcome to Pineapple Support's Healing Through Kink virtual event. My name is Kelly and I work for Pineapple Support. Pineapple Support is a non-profit organisation which is specifically formed to provide mental health support to online adult industry workers. If you want to learn out more about Pineapple Support and how you can help out, donate, or become one of our Pineapple United supporters, then you can head over to pineapplesport.org. Over the next few days, we will be presenting various seminars on how BDSM and kink can help heal trauma. Right now, what I really want to do is thank our sponsors, because without them, events like today wouldn't go ahead. So thank you to kink.com, loyalfans.com, feetforcash.com, shinybound.com, and clipsforsale.com. First up, we have Rachael Wells, who will be joining us. And Rachael has been a stable part of our mission for the last couple of years. She provides a wonderful range of services such as EMDR, counseling, and yoga. Today, her focus is BDSM and how to use it to help heal trauma. Rachael, if you want to join us. Hey,
hi.
You look gorgeous.
Thank you very much.
So I'll leave everyone with you now, Rachael. Over to you. Thank you ever so much for joining us today.
All right. Thank you, Kelly. All right. Okay. So again, my name is Rachael. I am a licensed mental health counselor and clinical manager. I'm based out of St. Petersburg, Florida, and I have been, working alongside Pineapple Support for not since the beginning, but close enough. And they just do wonders for the community. So I'm glad that all of you are joining us today, and hope I can provide a good kickoff with talking about BDSM and its relation to trauma and kink. So we're going to go through a little bit of history, background, some more of the fun stuff, but I'm going to go into probably some more science of trauma and help you understand how this lifestyle can enhance things for you. So I am old school, and if you've seen my stuff, I love my PowerPoints. Sorry, but they help me stay on track, and so you don't just have to listen. Try to provide a little bit of a visual to follow along. So here we go. So I will click the right thing. How about that? Okay. Right. Okay, so hopefully everyone can see that. Let me know if there's a little glitch. All right. So like I said, some of our goals are going to be just talking about what is BDSM. I'm sure most of us are familiar, but getting more into some of the history. What is complex trauma? And then how do these two interact? So really, if you walk away thinking, well, I'm already a part of this lifestyle, I just got some more information, or this is something I've been interested in, but I've been hesitant to get involved, I'm just going to give you an overview so you can just learn a little bit more. The best thing we can do is be informed. All right. Oops. I am trying to figure out the computer. Okay, so a little bit of history about BDSM. So not as nice as we'd like to think. So why I show that is to show you how far it's come and how far we've come as a society, and just in this way that we interact with each other in and outside of the bedroom, because this can be truly a lifestyle, as many of us know. So the history was not as rooted in consensual, communicative, and open relationships. It's actually quite the opposite. A lot of people may be familiar with the individual, the Marquis de Sade. Sadistic, some interesting things to look at there. I won't go into his whole life story, but not very pleasant. So there was lots of dehumanization, racism, especially anti-Blackness, Nazism in the originations of BDSM. It was truly used as control tactic, whereas now we understand it as a mutual understanding, loving concept to enhance relationships, to be a part of a lifestyle, however you partake in it or choose or wish to partake in it. Lots of lack of consent. There was lots of like slavery type interactions, especially with people of color, a lot of male dominated spaces, white dominated. It's really took a huge turnaround, as we can see. A lot of the practitioners that we see out in the dungeons or out in, talking about what it is that they do not meet these criteria. And I think we've successfully weeded out most of this. Of course, no space is perfect, but I think we've come a long way. And I think that shows really the heart of the community, that they could take something that started off pretty dark and change it into really what it was meant to be. So I imagine just dusting off all the stuff that it's not to reveal what it actually is. And that shows the strength of the community. Okay, and what about now? So I would say in BDSM now, the consensual, open, excited interactions are number one in practitioners that are doing this safely. This is at the top of the line. You have to make sure everything that you're doing is wanted. And remember, I'm not going to go into a whole consent discussion, but consent isn't just yes. We have to remember that. It's not just, okay, yeah, sure. You can kind of see in those, the consent was maybe wavering a bit. A lot of times people will take basic neutrality as consent, and we have to realize that consent is really excitable, enjoyable, like yes, not okay. So we see that here in the BDSM communities, that they prioritize these interactions through multiple verbal check-ins, reading of body language, using our emotional intelligence to make sure that relationships, in this lifestyle are safe. There's a restoration to a more even hierarchy per se. So lots of different genders, classes, races, people with disabilities, neurodivergence, very populous in this environment and in this lifestyle, which is exactly what something that's kind of underground or against the grain should be about. It's about restoring access to groups that have been marginalized or misunderstood. So we see that a lot in BDSM, is that people feel like they have somewhere that they can fit. And as I've discussed in the past, marginalized people usually have some level of trauma. So it all comes together to provide a safe space. And yeah, speaking of that, increase in safer spaces. So although, yes, there are some places out in the community that may not be safe, may still have some questionable people, overall, there's been a wide change in dungeon masters and even, the communities at large. And, when they come for meetings or get-togethers, that people that are not following this criteria need to see their way out. If they're using this as a old historical BDSM way to act to, assert dominance in an unsafe way, to practice, any of the isms and all that nasty stuff, typically the community has become strong enough that it can weed these people out. There's also an increase in community acceptance. Well, I don't want to get into a whole thing about 50 Shades of Grey. I have a whole lot of ideas about that you didn't come here to hear today, so I will keep it to myself. But I think we can say out of all the problematic, difficult, and challenging elements, that at least it brought to the public eye something different than, say, a vanilla type lifestyle. That this stuff happens, and in a way, the push of the book, and really more so the movie, unfortunately, that lead to a bit of a cultural shift in that you can say BDSM now or reference it in some way, and most people will at least know what you're talking about. Instead of what is that? You have a crazy fetish, you're insane, you know, all the stuff that people that have not ever interacted with this could act. There's kind of an idea of, well, that's a little more normal than it was 10, 20 years ago, per se. And now, you know, we've grown to where there's a lot more communication with everyone involved, especially in public and society. You know, this is a lifestyle that can go beyond the bedroom or beyond the dungeon or beyond wherever it is. Like there's some people that really connect with this, and this is part of their everyday. It can transcend into the public realm. So that goes into conversations of larger consent, like how are we presenting, what are we wearing, what are we looking like, and have people consented to this, you know, to see this interaction between us outside. And I think that these are good conversations that people are having. The fact that it's even a conversation at all shows that we're getting there. Okay, I'm just going to jump you right into some of the trauma stuff. So why I'm just jumping in so erratically is because there's really no way to bridge the gap. But we're going to look at some common behavioral symptoms in trauma and PTSD. And do we see this in BDSM? Of course we do, because this is everyday people. Everyday people have trauma, everyday people have PTSD, and a lot of them end up practicing BDSM. There's no written correlation. Interestingly enough, it has been research studied and found out that most of the time, the vast majority of people's kinks do not actually come from any sort of trauma. I think a lot of us think, well, here's why I like this in the bedroom, here's why I like that. Okay, sure. Some people, yes. We may have a very clear understanding of where something comes from, but overall, it's just our brain doing what it does. I call it brain glitching. It just happened. Your mind may have attached to some random thing in childhood. Like I've heard stories of people just saying, oh, I always had to like, you know, pile my socks outside of my laundry, and now I have a feet thing. Sometimes that's how it goes, just random stuff. But we're talking about trauma specifically. So I think it's important to flesh that out and to say, and you know, talk about how, either way, if your kink came from trauma or not, it doesn't reduce the validity of it. And it doesn't mean if it did, if somehow we're able to find out if it did come from trauma, that there's something wrong with that, that's bad, that's dysfunctional. No. The rule of thumb is if it's safe, if it's consensual, if you're into it, you're good to go. So, you know, a lot of times we try to figure out what came from trauma, and then if we feel like we found out that it did, then we might try to stop it or change it or wonder what our life would have looked like without it. It's not worth it. Practicing the acceptance of what is, again, as long as we're being safe all around, we're good to go. So some of these symptoms. Substance abuse, often used to handle hypervigilance, hyperarousal, numbness, and intense emotional responses. You can typically look at someone's trauma responses and almost guess what their substance of choice might be. For instance, in a lot of clients that I've served, if they're more hypervigilant or hyperaroused, more on edge, more opioids, marijuana, downers come into play, because if they're on all day long, they don't want to always feel that way. Same thing with if we've got someone that's numbed out, dissociated, disconnected, we might get into some of the stimulants to make them feel again. This can also go along with self-harm, high-risk behaviors, things that activate the adrenaline and cortisol response. So if you can see some of the links with BDSM there, what people might like in different types of pain play or control play, just kind of start thinking about that. Hypersexuality or asexuality. On this spectrum, you can also kind of see the seeking touch, stimulation, or shutting it down. And all of these, of course, come together because trauma and PTSD is very complex. And also, these are a spectrum. There's typically not someone who's just, I'm always numbed out, no affect, AKA emotion, blah. And then there's someone who's just off the wall, hypervigilant and on edge. We can tend to just bounce between the two. So that's where you can see some polysubstance abuse. The parasuicidal behaviors, which basically means things that look like they could end up in a suicidal act, but are not exactly meant for that. Now, I won't get into the whole psychology behind the million different reasons why people engage in self-harm. There are so many, and they're individual to each person. But you can also start seeing in these behaviors some kink stuff. Continued contact with an abuser, fluctuating between hatred and validation seeking. I think this is where a restorative, healthy relationship in the BDSM lifestyle has helped a lot of people I've worked with, because they can get the response of maybe, I think of a story I heard of where they felt like they were kind of being put in their place safely, but then also they get aftercare and, loving and kind responses. So the BDSM relationship, if this is something that someone's interested in, can actually help with giving you a new template for interacting with people. Because typically if we've not ever experienced someone that's been safe or kind or anything like that. Oh, I see a question here. Okay, so I don't know if it's blocked my screen, but someone anonymous said, how would I define hypersexuality and how I differentiate it from a naturally high sex drive coupled with self-harm and harm-seeking behaviors? Then there's another question right after, so I'll take that one first. Hypersexuality typically, as opposed to a high sex drive, which is healthy, no problem, no worries, absolutely welcomed. Again, as long as we meet the safety criteria, people they can do what they'd like and should be, if that's healthy for them, and that's just how their body and their libido work. Hypersexuality more has to do with the intention behind it. A lot of the people that I've worked with that have dealt with hypersexuality, first they mention it as an issue. Because we have to remember in mental health, which I think some therapists and other people kind of forget, is that for it to meet criteria for it being a problem, it has to actually be a problem to the person. We can't just say, you have a problem, and now it's a problem. If it's messing with their social or occupational functioning, as in this person is seeking out typically unsafe sexual situations that can go into self-harm, they might be, doing a lot of sexual activities without protection, with people they don't know, not telling their friends where they're at. going into something more like that, and if they talk about it, the reflection is that they're maybe trying to avoid feeling, or they are trying to feel. So, different things that we do can be based on, different things that we're looking to do. So some people engage to avoid, and some people engage to feel. So I hope that's helpful. But yes, I do want to say I'm glad that you brought it up. They are very different. Definitely not wanting to stigmatize any high sex drive. And the second question was, does hypersexuality really just stigmatize people who have a lot of sex? It certainly can. It depends on how people are using it and understanding the concept. And I forget people don't know me, so they might not understand how I'm using that concept. But it absolutely can. When we talk about hypersexuality and trauma, we have to be really careful to not just say, oh, you're just being hypersexual because I don't like what you're doing, or you're having sex more than I think someone should. There should be no judgment behind it. Hypersexuality is typically brought to a therapist or a helper or a listener as, I think this is a problem for me. So I hope that's helped. But if not, please send me another message. I'm happy to help. Alrighty. Some other symptoms, I'll just go through these. Increased freezing behavior, high risk behaviors and lack of safety planning. High risk can be so many things. It can be spending all the money that you've ever had. It can be, just going places with people that really could pose a risk to safety. It could be just, I've had people say, yeah, I used to just get in my car, I wouldn't wear my seatbelt, I'd bring a drink along with me, and I knew all of that was something that wouldn't be helpful to me, but I just didn't care. Because when you're dealing with trauma or low self-worth or just mental health, sometimes it's like that ability to care is not there. It's not that you don't care about other people or who can get involved. It's very self-focused. Like, I don't really care what happens to me. I've also called this living suicidally, where it's just like no holds barred. And then decreased quality and connection with others in isolation. Pretty popular with trauma. That's kind of what I call the final frontier of trauma healing, is when clients and people feel comfortable enough to start building safe relationships with others. And I think BDSM is where I've seen a lot of people that I've worked with go to, because it's very structured. Okay, there we go. All right. So, okay. So some cool little facts that I wish everyone knew about BDSM, especially the broader culture that has plenty of stigma against this. And this is True Research Library of Medicine. I didn't just pull this out of nowhere to prove a point. But those who practice BDSM have lower levels of depression, anxiety, which under the anxiety spectrum, acute stress, PTSD, neuroticism, which is typically the more on-edge, anxious type, abusive tendencies, and pathological behavior. So I think that describes, why the secondary effects of why some people engage in this. It makes people just enjoy it. They like the aesthetics. It's comfortable for them. It works for them. They get something out of it. And then I think there's that secondary gain of, when you're in such a structured environment where things make sense, you know what to expect in some ways. And also you're being free with something that you enjoy, and you're going to places and being with people that share your same values. There you go. I mean, these are similar statistical rates that you would see about people who engage in strong communities. That's really what this is about in some ways. strong communities and engaging in something that you enjoy, and working on not being afraid to be a part of that community and accepting yourself. I mean, I think there's a lot of deeper concept going on we may not think about, but it's there. Now, the interesting note that I found is despite all this good stuff, there are higher levels of dissociation, which I'm so glad I found this picture because it's really a beautiful explanation. But dissociation in brief terms is simply being elsewhere than we are right now. I think I might have another question. Someone said, will the slides be available somewhere? I am enjoying this. I can certainly make that happen for Pineapple. So don't you worry, I can get you a little link right now. And I have a question here. Someone said, could you please cite some literature that supports the assertion of mental health of BDSM practitioners? I'd love to show my colleagues. Yes, I think it gives me an option to type an answer. Or I can add it to the end of my slide, which I usually would do anyways, but I already have the stuff bookmarked, so we can definitely do that. And I think I have something else. Okay, perfect. All right, so the webinar will be recorded and on YouTube, and I believe it's also on Facebook. But please let me know. I'll have my contact info at the end. So if the person that asked that question, if I don't get a way to get you the literature now, shoot me an email. I will certainly get it to you. I'm a research buff. I'd be happy to help. Okay, so back to dissociation. Dissociation is just not being present. This isn't a crime. It's not a crime to be dissociated. So whenever I use that, I'm not trying to say, oh, it's so awful, it's so bad, but to some degree, it can get a little concerning. Yes, perfect. That's one of my emails, and I'll have a different one at the end. You can reach me any which way. You can send me a picture. That's okay. All right, so here you can see the dissociative spectrum. Highway hypnosis. Highway hypnosis, that's basically, we all do this. If you've ever daydreamed or been like, okay, I just drove 10 minutes home, but I don't remember stopping at any stoplights. I don't remember literally anything besides I got in the car, I was there, and now I'm here. Technically dissociating, not very harmful. Our brain knows how to click into patterns to go through our procedural memories, which are those step-by-step daily things like tying a shoe to get us where we need to go. Then there's an example of Netflix binging where you're like, oh, I guess it's 3 hours later. Oops, have I had something to drink or eat? No. Then we start going into the end of the scale where we're probably having some trauma reactions. So this can be losing time, sensation, awareness of space. I'll definitely be going a lot more into this in the next couple slides. So that's, of course, where it can get really upsetting, because now we're actually starting to lose bits and pieces of our life. And with people that have dissociation, like I myself have had, and many people I know have had, it's not something fun once we don't really need it anymore. That's what I'll say. Okay. All right. So, like I said, dissociation is a state of disconnect from person, place, or time. Now, it's typically delineated into two different types: depersonalization and derealization. I'll go from bottom up. So, derealization is this isn't real. I used to have a lot of this. This was my primary dissociation, as I would be talking to somebody, maintaining eye contact, no change, they could never notice. And then all of a sudden in my head, I'd be like, who is this? Who am I talking to? where am I? Like, what's going on? Like, you're just kind of like, huh? But you're still able, because it's a survival mechanism. Parts of your brain are still able to click into social engagement protocol. You know, it's not like all of a sudden you're like, where am I? You often won't see that. But that means this isn't real. Depersonalization means I'm not real. So you're sitting there, and this is where some people say it feels like they lifted up above themselves and walked down on themselves from something traumatic, or even just non-traumatic. Like, I was just watching myself. I didn't know who that was. I didn't feel like I was a person. Some people say it almost feels like you've got cotton balls between your ears, like just picking up your brain, or like old school TVs, if they went through like the wrong channel and you get the black and white static. Yes. So with BDSM practitioners having a higher level of dissociation, I think it's because, well, I'm not going to say I think, it is, research shows it's because it's this titrated, which means a little bit amount of time of dissociation, which is in a way, for a period of time, adaptive. Now, we don't always want to be dissociated or tap into dissociation, because if you've dealt with this, sometimes people will tap into it to protect themselves. But after we've gone through the initial trauma, whatever created our dissociation, whenever we've handled that, and then we don't technically need it anymore, it still kind of hangs on like an extra pinky toe, and then we just start using it whenever we kind of feel like it, or it just starts happening. And for a while, it can seem helpful, and then it starts taking away our life a little bit, taking away our mindfulness. So BDSM, I think, has this piece where it can really help bridge the gap between unhelpful dissociation and adaptive, which I know sounds odd, but this is kind of like harm reduction in a way. It's practiced evenly, mindfully, and intentionally. Most people know when they're going into some sort of scene what they're going to do, what's going to go down, and why they're doing it. That's not how dissociation happens otherwise. It's just surprise, now here I am, and I don't know who I am, who that is, or where I am. That's a little different. Okay. So what they found in BDSM practitioners is that they get into an altered state of consciousness that can, in ways, be healthy for trauma survivors. I'm not going to say all the time, or that this is something that we need to do for the rest of our life. I'm not talking about BDSM, but this dissociative state stuff. Oops, I think I have some questions about that. It looks like I got two about the similar thing. The dissociation that comes from subspace. Would I say that can be negative? I lean very heavily towards no, because we're dealing with a, dissociation overall is meant to be a survival tool, which isn't good or bad. It just is what it is. Most people that I've worked with that have talked about their time in subspace would regard it as positive. And, I think of like highway hypnosis or daydreaming. We're not going to, those things aren't crimes, like I said. We're not going to say that's bad because you're not present all day long. Our brain has access to this for a reason. It's not harming anyone. Again, going back to that, do I see it as a problem? If you feel like when you're in subspace, you're losing time in a way that's unhelpful to you or messing with your life, like I'm not making my doctor's appointments, I'm not taking my meds on time, like it's troubling you, then that dissociation in subspace may be a bit of a problem. But for you, so subspace, not negative, but I would classify it as, maybe I can go back to that scale real quick. If you would just entertain me for a minute with that. I think I'd probably put it a little dot or two above Netflix binging. Because that's a space that a lot of people go to seek safety. and restoration from their daily lives. So I could never, and I'm not the, BDSM patrol or the trauma patrol, but I would never dare to classify that as negative if someone gets something from it. Okay, and I would like to read this. They put it in this response, Mistress Melissa, but I believe in my experience it's the opposite. Subspace being fully present in the moment instead of dissociating from it. That's a great way to look at it. It honestly is. Some people would say that in their subspace, they are completely in the moment. So you never know. It depends on your bodily responses, who you are as a person, how you respond. So sometimes when people go into a scene, they want to feel everything. They are aware of the tingling on their skin, flogs, what's hitting them, what's touching them. Every little bit moment, they want to be there. And some people I've had tell me about, they kind of float off into like this dreamscape. They're doing something that's restorative for them. That's what we really got to get back to. So most people aren't seeking out to cause any sort of dissociative harm, if that makes sense. Okay. I'm getting lots of questions. I like you guys. Most people just, I'm like, I'll talk all day long. Just say something. Okay. Let me get to this question here that just came in. Is little space, age play, and or age progression anywhere in the realm of the subspace style dissociation? I would say yes. Again, realizing that that can be a restorative space, and kind of going back to what Mistress Melissa said, is that can actually be a very present space. So it's really up to you to, when you're in these spaces, notice what's going on. Do you feel like you're kind of dreamy and just kind of relaxed? What's going on? Or do you feel like something not good is happening? Or do you feel like you're actually losing track of time, place, person? Like, are you completely disoriented? But I would say anytime we go into a space that's just fully us, it's hard to say. I think for some, it may be a little dissociative in a positive way, like that adaptive dissociation, like when we're Netflix binging, or we're having highway hypnosis, or we're daydreaming. And I'm going to go into another concept that I think will help a lot of you feel comfortable with what I'm talking about. Okay, I'm getting a lot of responses. I'm having fun with this. Okay, Richard from England is wondering if, with regard to the stress response in BDSM, was there any particular research looking into adrenaline, cortisol stress response, turning it into positive stress? Yes. I know I don't want to read out the whole thing because I don't want to, if anyone might get a little confused, I don't want to read it out. Okay, wondering about if this kind of switch from adrenaline hyped up stress response to dopamine and oxytocin release can function as a soothing mechanism. I will get to that. We're going to get to some good concepts that I think, because I know right now I'm kind of in a space where things might feel a little like, we're going to get there. Oh, I like this. I don't know if they want to be mentioned as it's anonymous, but someone said that as a submissive and trauma survivor and someone diagnosed with PID, which is dissociative identity disorder, formerly known as multiple personality disorder, we don't use that anymore unless someone chooses to. There's a duality in being dissociated, but also in the moment. Absolutely possible, absolutely normal. 100%. So yes, we can definitely shift into those spaces. That is the duality of being a person. Okay. Yes, and then someone said, I always thought of dissociation as something bad and to be avoided and fixed. Is there a lit available in the ways it can be good and therapeutic? Yes, I will try to make sure. You might have to email me if you're interested in that, because I don't know how fast I can pull up my stuff. I don't want to bug whoever the next person presenting is. I don't know. I know I have a little bit more of time, but I am happy to provide any references, because my approach in therapy to clients is that dissociation can be maladaptive. It can be if we're losing track of time. You know, I've had people say, I can't even interact with my children because I've been lost for 4 hours. Or I'm missing out on parts of my life. There can absolutely be states. You guys, you got to let me get to them, because I think you're going to like what I have to say. Yes, there's my email again. So Kelly will just spam you with my email, and I'll have a different email of mine at the end. So let's move on from this so we can get to the stuff that I think will answer. Okay. So the altered state of consciousness that can be healthy for trauma survivors and anyone, shout out. There is a state that is technically dissociative in nature that is called flow. Check it out, Google it, look at it. Flow is a state of mind where you're doing something that you enjoy and get pleasure from so much, but you can lose track of time, and you tend to be hyper-focused, but in a way that's enjoyable to you. That's what I kind of mean by some of the rigidity. It's like you're really like zoned in. You can feel everything, smell everything, taste everything. Like you're just, it's almost like you're seeing colors and feeling stars. That's how a lot of artists will talk to me about this. Like I painted, this big mural the other day, and oh my goodness, it was time for me to go home before I recognized it. Now, I think it would be hard pressed to point at that person and say, excuse me, you were dissociating. No, 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 bad. No, that would be ridiculous. Because, when I would talk to my clients about this, I'm like, that's a great thing. You're really feeling, you're really into it. That means that you might even love something or really enjoy something. It's your time, it's your space. So flow is a real researched concept that you can look into, and would probably, with the questions that I got, be more appropriate of a label for subspace, age regression, age play, all the other things that we've mentioned today. So I hope you take that to heart and think about it and look at it, because we don't want to just start labeling ourselves as I'm dissociating and I'm bad and I'm dysfunctional. No, bad and dysfunctional are not so much terms that we need right now. Then there's this other state they found called transient hypofrontality. Big words to basically mean dream space. That's what I call it, at least. And when I said ragdoll, it'll all link up to my next slide or so. Is this kind of like, you're not so much hyper-focused. You might be kind of floaty, just kind of experiencing things, like head in the clouds type of thing. A lot of my clients would say, I didn't know the name for it back then, but a lot of my clients would say that they felt this if they tended to be someone that was kind of numbing out a little bit, and they went to dungeons or into scenes like that to numb out a little bit of trauma, and in a way with someone that they trust. They would just kind of be like just kind of let loose, ragdoll, just, I'm good. Happy. These things are, well, I don't want to project my labels, but most people would describe this as enjoyable, both the flow and the hypofrontality. So definitely look into those concepts if you're curious. Okay, this is a lot of information. I am so sorry. I will run through it fast because I imagine that I'm bumping up the clock soon. And I know there's lots of curiosity about this. I'm trying to link this to, now I'm going back into typical trauma responses outside of BDSM, outside of flow, outside of transient hypofrontality. We're dealing with the types of immobility here. So you might see a link between how you've responded in trauma in the past versus what you do in scenes, what type of subspace, what type of things that you're interested in. And remember, it's not always linked, but you might want to just put some, you might just want to let this kind of process and see what you think. Okay, I'm not going to go into all sorts of too much detail with this, but there are different types of immobility. Tonic is the first. This is what you'll see mostly out in nature. It is also called apparent death. It's an extreme dissociative state. You can go in and out. It's a prey adaptation evolutionarily. One plays dead, one bleeds, less in nature. I know it's kind of dark, but this is what we're dealing with. It's usually activated after an individual thinks escape impossible or fighting fail. So this is the rigidity. So if we go back to the flow, hyper-focused rigidity, sometimes you can see how those two mix. Like I said, they don't always, but I've definitely talked with clients that have had more of the freeze response, which is technically what tonic immobility is. And then when they're in their happy spaces, they're more of a flow type person as opposed to a hypofrontality. But it's not always the case. I'm just throwing out concepts here. I'm not trying to exactly link these two. I hope that makes sense. Then we've got collapsed mobility. This is the ragdoll state. Sleepy, drop in blood pressure, heart rate, faint-like state, limpness. This is another reaction. This isn't so much a freeze, but it's more like a fawn. Like just, I no longer have the energy to fight. And you might be more of a transient hypofrontality person than scenes. Who knows? These are just things that I like to talk and share with people so they can maybe recognize things in their past in themselves. But the big thing I really wanted to touch on in this is, I hope you can see it, my thing might be blocking it, is the quiescent, technically immobility. It promotes rest and healing. Parentheses after the danger is past. So this is like aftercare, which I'm not going to say is important for everyone. I would say it's pretty darn important overall, but remember, I'm not the BDSM police, as I've said. I do not get to dictate what's right and wrong for people. But it's interesting how typically after these states, not these so much, but more these, you'll see, my adrenaline is dipping back down. Now, I believe Richard was the person who mentioned this in the Q&A. Now that my adrenals are softening, because our brain is going to react to pain play like a threat, typically. Like it's just our brain. Our brain's like, hey, what are you doing? Even if part of us is like, I enjoy this, this is good for me, this is safe for me. Our brain's like, hey, what's going on? You know, it's the skin receptors, it's the skin temp, it's the heart rate variability. There's lots of things. But once you start dipping into your quiet state of like, scene's over, I'm about to head home, I'm going to change my comfies. Now we start getting hormones like dopamine. And most importantly, oxytocin, which is the bonding hormone. So let's get into that real quick. The neuroscience of BDSM. Overall, it promotes an increase in serotonin. In fact, techniques from BDSM used to be used in medical treatment. Literally, there was a flogging treatment to secrete serotonin for people. I can't remember exactly what they were treating. I'm sure I could find it. I know I came across it. So just something to know. Now, I did want to put this in here, mental illness. I don't really love the term mental illness. right that needs to be treated by professionals, not by a play partner. Remember, that is not someone's responsibility, but a lot of the symptoms of mental health conditions can be temporarily alleviated through these states, these close relationships, this connectivity, this community. And then right here, we've got pain play, helps with releasing endorphins and healing activation. So healing of wounds, because if you're getting in pain, your body's like, I need to heal. Bondage, feelings of security, a lot of people, almost like a weighted blanket. You know, people use weighted blankets. On the surface, it might be like, oh my God, that sounds like you want to be trapped. But there's a difference between when you have a trust in a scene, there can be feelings of security, comfort, and safety. And that might be the safest you've ever felt. So that's why we need to understand these things. And then the anchoring that happens in BDSM. I feel like everyone's dream, especially those with trauma and, you know, any sort of codependence or childhood attachment stuff, we've got here clear goals, structured rules, and identified tasks. We know who's doing what, when what's happening, and what's going to go on. We'd be lucky to get that anywhere else, right? I mean, think about it. There's not a lot of places where things are this clear. And I think that's part of the appeal for a lot of us, is that things are put out there. We can understand them. We know what's expected of us. And that promotes safety, security, comfort, independence, and expression of self. Most of the things in the world are in the gray area. It's confusing. But here we've got a place where we know what's going on, and hopefully a strong community that we trust. And then, like I said, the aftercare, back to that quiescent immobility, just and we bond. Oxytocin release is what is released between a baby and a parent. It's true bonding and connection. So, like I've kind of said, BDSM and connectedness. It can strengthen and provide a pathway for bonding, security with others, communication, clarity, trust, the role-playing role, you know what you're supposed to do and when, and even resolution of conflict. That was one of my most interesting things that I came across in the literature some time ago, is that in couples that have BDSM going on in their lifestyle, they have higher conflict resolution than your average couple. You know, this was specifically done on couples, so you know that may not mean you, but that's still a good thing to think about. So the conflict resolution was there. Okay, so I'm just about to finish up. Curious, worried about judgment? Check out dungeons near you. Quick Google search. I know FetLife. Some people have found some good connections through that. Check out other performers that you might know that actually practice this in their personal life. Because remember, the personal and the professional can be very different. So just make sure to respect people's boundaries on that. Then just educate yourself. If this is something that interests you, or you want to know more about, or you're already deep into the lifestyle, might be something to look into. So it's time for me to zip it, but I know my email has been put in my alternate email has been put in the chat. This is another email of mine if you would like to ask me again for the literature, because we got to get to our next person. Please email me.
Hi, Rachel. Thank you so much for that. Such a great response. No, ever so interactive already. So, like I say, if anybody else wants further information from Rachel, I've now indulged you with another email address of her. But obviously, thank you so much for your time today. Absolutely brilliant. And no doubt we will get some more queries and questions as well as the night goes on.